Hello, this is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the week ending. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. The Labour Party has accused the Conservative Party-led government of being in chaos, split and at war with itself ahead of the EU referendum on 23rd of June. Charter Secretary of State and Charter Secretary for Business and Innovation, Angela Eagle, studying for the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, attacked the Conservative Party at the Prime Minister's question time.
While Labour is campaigning to ensure that the UK remains in the European Union because it's the best way to defend rights at work, as well as jobs and prosperity, the party opposite is split right down the middle. It's descending into vicious acrimony. Now, last week, the Employment Minister, the Employment Minister called for Brexit so there could be a bonfire of workers' rights. Does the Chancellor agree with her, or does he agree with Len McCluskey that a vote to stay in the European Union is the best deal for Britain's workers?
Well, first of all, she confirmed that when she was in the Treasury, she asked absolutely no questions about the tax affairs of Google. When it comes to the European Union, as she knows, we agree on this. I think it's better that Britain remains in the European Union. Why don't we have some consensus now on some other issues, like having an independent nuclear deterrent? Let's have a consensus on that. Let's have a consensus on supporting businesses rather than disparaging businesses. Let's have a consensus on not piling debts on the next generation, but dealing with our deficits. Let's have a consensus that the parties in this House should have a credible economic policy.
I think he's just agreed with Len McCluskey. Now, the former Work and Pensions Secretary said this week that the Chancellor's Brexit report should not be believed by anyone. And he branded the Chancellor Pinocchio, with his nose just getting longer and longer with every fib. Now, meanwhile, the General Secretary to the TUC said that the Treasury's report gives us 500,000 good reasons to stay in the European Union. Who does the Chancellor think the public should listen to? His former cabinet colleague or the leader of Britain's millions of trade unionists?
Well, look, I don't think it's any great revelation that different Conservative MPs have different views on the European Union. That's why we're having a referendum, because this issue does divide parties and families and friends, and we made a commitment in our manifesto that the British people would decide this question. And I might just observe that if she wants to talk about divisions in parties, while she's sitting here, the leader of the Labour Party is sitting at home wondering whether to impeach the former leader of the Labour Party for war crimes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that he agrees with Francis O'Grady. It's just a pity that he can't get half his backbenchers and most of his own party to agree with him. And given that the former Work and Pensions Secretary has just called the Prime Minister disingenuous, and the former Tory Mayor of London has called him demented, I wouldn't talk about Labour splits. If I were him, I'd get his own house in order before he talks about us. Now, Mr. Speaker, following his second omni-shambles budget earlier this year, I see the Chancellor's approval ratings have collapsed by 80 points amongst his own party. Now, given that he seems to be following a similar career path, isn't it time he turned to Michael Portillo for advice? Last week, the former would-be leader said of the Queen's speech, after 23 years of careful thought about what they would like to do in power, Michael Portillo said, the answer is nothing. Absolutely. There is nothing they want to do with office or power. Now, the government has nothing to do, nothing to say, and thinks nothing, is what he said. But even this nothing Queen's speech has caused a revolt on his own backbenchers and forced yet another U-turn to avoid the first defeat of a government on its legislative programme for 92 years. Mr. Speaker, doesn't that tell you all you need to know about this Prime Minister and Chancellor? It seems they can't even get their backbenchers to vote for the nothing without a bite.
I'll tell you what we've done in recent weeks. We've taken another 1 million people out of tax altogether. We've frozen fuel duty. We've cut business rates for small businesses. We've seen the deficit fall by another 16 billion. We've delivered a record number of jobs, and we've introduced a national living wage. That's what we've been up to. And what have the Labour Party been up to? She talks of U-turns. They've turned the Labour Party from a party that gave Britain its nuclear deterrent to a party that wants to scrap it, from a party that created the Academies programme that now wants to abolish all academies, from a party that once courted businesses that now disparages it. The prawn cocktail offensive is just plain offensive these days. And as a result, they've gone from a Labour Party that won elections to a Labour Party that's going to go on losing those elections.
Mr. Speaker, with 29 days to go until the most important decision this country has faced in a generation, we have before us a government in utter chaos, split down the middle, at war with itself. The stakes could not be higher, and yet this is a government adrift at the mercy of its own rebel backbenchers, unable to get their agenda through Parliament. Instead of providing the leadership the country needs, they're fighting a bitter proxy war over the leadership of their own party. And I noticed that no outer, all the Brexiteers have been banished from the front bench. It's nice to see the Justice Secretary here. I think the Chancellor's put the rest of his Brexit colleagues in detention. Instead of providing the leadership the country needs, they're fighting a bitter proxy war over the leadership of their own party. Instead of focusing on the national interest, they're focusing on their narrow self-interest. What we need, Mr. Speaker, is a government which will do the best for Britain. What we've got is a Conservative Party focused only on themselves.
Meanwhile, Bentv has been talking to people about their views on the EU referendum and their position.
I think we should stay in Europe.
Why is that?
Because I think I'm not a great one for boundaries, and I think we can do more together than we can apart. And I think there's lots of things that Europe give us that if we left, we wouldn't realise what we had till it had gone. And I feel quite European. But that said, the level of the debate so far has been very, very poor. Each side has been pointing to negative things, and I think we need to look at the positive things.
We had a motion at Greenwich Council, and we agreed that we should stay in Europe. That doesn't mean that the Commonwealth isn't really important to us, because it is. But actually, you know, we no longer have those big manufacturing industries like coal and steel. We have service industries, and so it's crucial, you know, that we stay in Europe. And you know, many young people want to work abroad, and so why not have people from the European Union living and working here?
Campaigners for Britain to leave the EU have turned their heat on the government using immigration as a tool to drive home their points. Brexit campaigners have said UK will face a wave of immigration from Turkey if it votes to remain in the EU. The Prime Minister, David Cameron, has, however, dismissed this speculation.
The Vote Leave campaign claims Turkey is on course to join the European Union and says that would lead to 1 million Turkish citizens coming to Britain, including, in the words of one activist, murderers, terrorists and kidnappers. The claims, made Sunday by a government minister, drew a sharp rebuke from Prime Minister David Cameron.
Turkey joining the EU is not remotely on the cards. At the current rate of progress, it would be decades, literally decades, before this even had a prospect of happening. And even at that stage, we would be able to say no.
Existing EU members effectively have a double veto on whether Turkey joins, says Damien Chalmers, Professor of EU Law at the London School of Economics.
There has to be agreement in the Council of Ministers where the national governments sit, unanimous agreement there. Then after that, Turkey would have to sign a treaty with each of the existing 28 member states to join the EU, and at that moment a national parliament could veto it.
The debate comes at an awkward time. Turkey agreed in March to take back refugees from Europe, partly in return for the opening up of new phases in Ankara's EU accession process. Turkish ministers have demanded clarity from Brussels. But in reality, Chalmers says the negotiations are going at a glacial pace. He points out there must be agreement on 35 different policy areas before any treaty can be signed.
It has been negotiating since 2005. So far, only one of those 35 has been successfully concluded.
Britain's vote on June 23rd on whether to stay in the EU could have a much wider impact on Europe's relationship with Turkey.
Brexit or stay in EU referendum in the UK will generate a wave that will affect Europe substantially, especially if it is in favour of leaving the EU.
With polls showing the Remain camp pulling into the lead, Vote Leave campaigners are focusing on fears over immigration.
We want our orders back, we want our passports back, we want our country back, and if everyone that agrees with us goes out to vote on June the 23rd, we will make it UK Independence Day.
Prime Minister Cameron warned Monday that a vote to leave the EU would be, in his words, the self-destruct option, pushing Britain into recession and causing 500,000 job losses.
The US President Barack Obama has lifted a 41-year arms deal embargo against Vietnam as part of efforts to normalize relations with the communist state. The new arms deal will open up Vietnam to greater US arms sales. Here is a highlight of President Obama's visits.
Vietnam very much appreciates the U.S. decision to completely lift the ban on lethal weapon sales to Vietnam.
This change will ensure that Vietnam has access to the equipment it needs to defend itself and removes a lingering vestige of the Cold War. It also underscores the commitment of the United States to a fully normalized relationship with Vietnam, including strong defense ties with Vietnam and this region for the long term. When there's freedom of the press, when journalists and bloggers are able to shine a light on injustice or abuse, that holds officials accountable and builds public confidence that the system works. And when there's freedom of assembly and citizens are free to organize in civil society, then countries can better address challenges that government sometimes cannot solve by itself. So it is my view that upholding these rights is not a threat to stability, but actually reinforces stability and is the foundation of progress. before I answer your question, why don't you give me a little rep? Let's see. Let's see what you got. Come on. Do you need like a little beat?
Vietnamese or English?
In Vietnamese, of
In
course.
Vietnamese?
Now I won't know what it means.
Tình hình một mình nhà lầu trình anh giàu sang như vua chúa, giật mình sự tình thiệt ra đen đúa. Mà đời vậy là hey, it's been a crazy day. Khi mà ta nhắm hai đôi mắt, xuống mái chèo chơi với mày.
Something like rap, which started off as an expression of poor African Americans, now suddenly has become a global phenomenon and is really the art form of most young people around the world today in a lot of ways. You got to let people express themselves. That's part of what a modern 21st century culture is all about.
US-led Vietnam Defense Cooperation will include patrol boats and training for Vietnam Coast Guards.
President Obama reviewed a ceremonial Vietnamese honor guard as part of an elaborate welcoming ceremony on his first trip to the country. Later, the U.S. president presented the gift Vietnam has most desired from Washington.
Vietnam very much appreciates the U.S. decision to completely lift the ban on lethal weapon sales to Vietnam, which is a clear proof that both countries have completely normalized the relations.
Vietnam is wary about the increasing maritime assertiveness of its northern neighbor, China, which is 29 times larger. The two countries have a territorial dispute in the South China Sea that has strained relations between the two normally allied communist governments in Hanoi and Beijing. But President Obama said the decision to allow weapon sales to Vietnam is not based on China, although Chinese authorities are not likely to accept that interpretation.
Given all the work we do together across the spectrum of economic, trade, security, humanitarian efforts, that it was appropriate for us not to have a blanket across-the-board ban.
The two countries, for now it seems, have agreed to disagree on the thorniest issue dividing them: Vietnam's poor record on human rights. On Tuesday, Obama is expected to meet with civil society members here in the capital before departing for Ho Chi Minh City, where the visit will likely turn to trade and business ties. According to the White House, bilateral trade has nearly tripled in the last 7 years and now tops $45 billion.
Many refugees fleeing war and hardship have continued to seek more illegal routes to Europe, even as UK has refused to open its border to take in refugees. Meanwhile, Greek authorities are moving thousands of migrants to a more permanent camps further inside Greece.
The children of Idomeni. Among the 8,500 migrants at the camp are dozens of newborn babies. The parents once dreamt of raising their children in Western Europe. Now they are being forced to retrace their steps back into Greece.
My child's future is lost. With this situation and with what we're going through, I don't believe he will have a future. I'm desperate because my baby was born in such conditions. The child is tormented, and I am tormented with him.
Macedonia closed the frontier in March, but the migrants stayed on in the hope that they might one day be allowed to continue their journey. Aid workers say Idomeni has become symbolic of the refugees' desperation.
They're worried that they might be forgotten, that the attention might dissipate, and it's really vital that as people are moved today, we don't let that happen. It's really vital that we keep up the pressure to ensure that people in Greece at the moment have access to the right services, they have access to having their claims for asylum heard.
Greece insists it will not use violent tactics to move the refugees. Authorities want to clear the camp and reopen the road and rail links into Europe.
People are leaving by themselves with no use of force. What remains now is to clear the railways that formed part of the camp.
The migrants are being moved to camps built around the northern city of Thessaloniki, but aid workers say that is not a long-term solution.
Only a very small fraction of the number of people that the EU has pledged to resettle from Greece and Italy have actually been resettled so far. So it's vital that that starts to work better.
Many of the migrants are not giving up hope of reaching Western Europe.
I stay here 3 months ago. Next step, I am go to Serbia, but illegal way.
Around 200 migrants arrive in the Serbian capital Belgrade every day, mostly via Bulgaria. For those willing to put their lives in the hands of smuggling gangs, this remains the only road to Western Europe.
The Royal Borough of Greenwich has elected for the first time in 51 years a British of African descent, Olu Babatola, as its mayor. Councillor Babatola took the oath of office as the first African mayor of the borough amidst a lot of hope and expectation from the diverse ethnic London borough.
I'm here live at the Painted Hall at the inauguration of the new mayor of the Royal Borough of Greenwich, Councillor Olu Babatola. It's going to be a lovely event. I'm going to be speaking to a lot of people. I'm going to find out what they think about the new mayor and what their expectations are from him.
History was made as the first African mayor, Olubenga Babatola, was inaugurated as the mayor of the Royal Borough of Greenwich. The inauguration, which took place in the Painted Hall, sometimes referred to as God's Dining Room, was graced by mayors from different constituencies, cabinet members, MPs and various representatives of various organizations within and outside the borough. The event kicked off with a farewell speech by the outgoing mayor, Norman Adams.
It's quite remarkable that we've had to wait so long for our first African male mayor. We've had mayors from India, Pakistan, the Caribbean over the last 20 years, but never anyone of African descent. So this is a very, very important day, I think, for people of African descent who currently live in the borough, and they form a very large minority within the borough which should be properly represented and recognised.
The hall was filled with high cheers and applause as the newly inaugurated mayor mounted the podium to give his first speech in his new office. The mayor called on everyone to come together and use their unity in diversity to make the Royal Borough of Greenwich more prosperous.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. I am proud to be elected as the mayor of the Royal Borough of Greenwich. Thank you. It is a significant year for the borough, as I am the first African to be given this honor. And I thank my fellow councillors for giving me this opportunity to represent this great borough. My sincere thanks go to God Almighty for His mercy and grace, and to my wife and my children for their continued support.
To make the Royal Borough of Greenwich to become more prosperous this year and years to come. So go out there and proclaim that this borough is of unity in its diversity. Thank you very much.
You got the power.
mayor was very clear, even in his speech, that one of the things he wants to do is to promote diversity, and which is what we've always seen. And we're trusting that with him being the new mayor, that will be expressed all across the board. There'll be more presence for even the BMA, not only in the political sphere, but in every sphere of the community.
My name is Lolade Babatola. I am the second daughter of Olu Babatola, the new mayor. A lot because he was born in Nigeria, Ibadan, and it's a very big difference from Ibadan to here. He probably never would have thought he would have made it this far growing up. So I'm really, really proud of him, and he's proud of himself. I just thank God for bringing us to where we are now, and we'll continue to go onwards and upwards in Jesus' name.
We are so, I mean, it's an especially proud thing that the very first mayor, the very first African mayor is a Nigerian. So, I mean, we're here representing. So it's a wonderful night for us.
Show Nigeria true identity. Because back in the past, a lot of people have said, oh, Nigeria people, when they talk about all the bad things, it's Nigeria, all the horrible things, it's Nigeria. But with Olu being a mayor and the first African mayor in Greenwich, that will show that Nigeria in diaspora are which truly representing the true color of Nigeria, loyal, law-abiding citizen, hard-working politician that speak the right thing and do the right thing for the people. And
The inauguration ended as guests moved to the Queen Mary Undergraft for some refreshments. Osarimen Opalwa reporting for Bentv News.
And this is all we have for you this week on News Roundup. Thank you for being part of the program. I'm Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.